Welcome, independent researchers, skeptics, and all of humankind, to Shadow Citizen. Shadow Citizen will explore the shadows of an alternate reality. Your hosts, Rachael L. McIntosh.
Oh, I know. Everybody loves that screaming right there. All right, gang, we made it through another week. Thanks for joining me. Tonight, we have Cody Snodgres. I hope I'm saying his name right. He's been making the rounds on the internet, and he's been interviewed by a bunch of different people. And I thought I got him right away, but I noticed today when I checked up on him, he's been talking to a lot of people. His claim to fame is that he claims to be former special ops, and that he was approached to bomb the Murrah Building in Oklahoma City. And I was fascinated by the interview he did with Jeff Rense, and I contacted him, and he contacted me back, and we talked for a while on the phone, and I wanted to share this with everybody. We've got 2 hours. I'd like to introduce everybody to Cody Snodgres. Am I saying that right, Cody?
Yes, you are, Rachael.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your life and talking with me and talking with our listeners. And this is really important, what you're going to tell us, because in many ways it relates to other instances in the United States, such as 9/11, maybe even Sandy Hook. And it has to do with a false flag that was contrived by the government, which you are telling people that they approached you to actually do this.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Why don't you'll start at the beginning, because we spoke on the phone for an hour and I feel like I already caught up, but I know that you have something you want to say. You've got kind of a pre-planned thing, because I've heard you say it 3 times on different radio stations, but I think it's important that you say from the beginning who you are, how you got here, how you got to me, and tell the story, your story. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, what we usually do is go through a brief timeline, so listeners can get a feel for the information about the Murrah Building. And you're right, it was a false flag op. The reasons for it, a lot of Americans don't know. They haven't heard. And these kind of things are going on all around the world. It's a pattern. And my friend Oli Damagard at lightonconspiracies.com, he's a well-known researcher in the field. But as far as my background goes, I graduated from high school here in the U.S. In Dallas in 1974, and I scored in the top 1% on the SAT test in physics going into college. And I was also the only 4-year letterman there, and I was a real good athlete and everything, so I got a full tennis scholarship to college. And in 1975, in the fall, I was approached in the physics department by one of the professors, and he said, there's a recruiter down here who wants to see you alone, and it was the CIA. And they told me it was because of my real high test scores in physics, and they wanted to recruit me, and I turned them down. I said I didn't want to work for the government at that time. And I had been already working with some Vietnam veterans that had come back from the war, and a couple of them had worked for the CIA. And I started working with them, doing small things, and they were training me at the same time. And then fast forward into 1979, I graduated with a double major in both Bachelor of Science degree in math and physics. Then I started working on my Master of Science degree in physics at Stephen F. Austin State University in Nacogdoches. I got to fly the Space Shuttle simulator down there at NASA. Well, yeah, that was really cool.
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
Yeah. And, we went on a big field trip down there and everything. But then I worked for Chevron Oil Company. That was a civilian cover. And then moved up to Amoco Production Company in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I was a Petroleum and Research Geophysicist, and that was also a civilian cover. And then later in 82 through 85, during that time, we were working in the over in Arkansas with Bill and Hillary Clinton in CIA's covert operations. There were 3 of them there, One was Centaur Rose. The other one was Jade Bridge, and the other one was Screwworm. And Centaur Rose was a op to arm the Nicaraguan freedom fighters, the Contras. And of course, that was the Bolin Amendment in '84 had been passed, and Congress didn't want us to go down there and get militarily involved. But Ronald Reagan, the president, ordered CI director to go around and conduct an op there for that. So we can talk about all that later. But
so basically you had been recruited because of an SAT physics test. There's a section in the SATs that had to do with physics, and they said, oh, this guy knows what he's doing, and they tried to recruit you, and you said no. And then you kind of fell into it because it sounds like you were hanging out with the Vietnam vets,
right.
And they started training like just offline. They just said, hey, you want to learn how to do this? Or was this like a military thing that you got involved at that point?
I went in the military, and that's why, as we go through this later on, you'll see why I was a perfect candidate to be offered this job at the Murrah Building. They usually do it with people that don't have any ties or connections in the Black Op community, because the agents, case officers, they don't want to have any political blowback in case something sours up.
Something happens. Sure.
That's why they used Tim McVeigh. He was an ex-military cutout. So
right.
The guys that I were working with had been in the military, but then they had got to the civilian world. They had been approached by CI so that they had all the military training and everything, but now they were civilians, and so they did jobs like the Centaur Rose job, moving the arms and the drugs, and that way there's no tie.
Okay, so you just said you were in the military. You were.
No,
you were not. You were not. These people were.
Yeah.
And you fell in with them. How did you meet them?
Oh, I had some friends in high school, and their older brothers had come back from the war, and we met them through them, and then contact, and we started doing little jobs for them here and there, and it just grew over the years into bigger and bigger things, and trained in martial arts for 20 years. So
wow, this is awesome. All right, so you're like living the Vita Loca over there. All right, so you hanging out with these people. They're training you like martial arts, and you're learning how to do all this like really sneaky stuff. And you were still going to school at the same time, or were you done with the school at that point?
No, I was still going through undergrad school, and then I had a full tennis scholarship to pay for that, and then I had a graduate teaching assistantship. In grad school, I taught 3 sections of Physics 101. It was about 30, 35 kids a class.
Oh my gosh, you were the professor of that? Which school is that? Which one?
That was at Stephen F. Austin State University. That's in Nacogdoches, Texas, East Texas.
Okay. Imagine this guy being your physics teacher, everybody. Oh my gosh, how cool is that? All right, so it's Stephen S. Austin, and you're sitting in class and you're teaching people physics, and it's like a normal life, and then you like on the weekends you're hooking up with these people, or you kind of fell out with those people. Are you still in with them?
Yeah, when they had different things they needed done, a lot of what I was doing was driving. We'd drive a load, or they'd have a truck ready and tell me where to take it, and I would meet a contact, and they would have a code. I would know who the contact was. I would know what was in the load, and my job was to get it from point A to point B with no blowback, no distortion, and it was part of the bigger op. And then later on, as I proved myself and got better and better at things, they started cutting me in more on what you need to know. But when you're running
do you get money for that, though, at that point? Or were you just doing it because it was fun?
No,
or,
I was getting paid.
What kind of sucked you in at that point? Because you didn't want to work for the government.
I was getting paid really good. That's why I did it.
Okay, so that's what happened. Money starts coming, and you're like, all right, I'll drive a truck.
Money.
Uh-huh.
And we worked up to a point where I was making $20,000 a month, this base pay, whether I did anything or not. And then we'd get called for different jobs to do different things, and sometimes we would make a little extra money on the side, depending on what we were doing.
Wow. Wait, now you're saying who are these we're? Who's we?
The people we were working with.
Uh-huh. And you didn't really know them.
But
you did.
I knew some of them. some of the contacts that I was told to meet, I never saw before in my life. I would meet, for instance, if you want specifics, they would tell me to drive a truck somewhere, like say to a Walmart parking lot in some town, and then I would open the hood and stand around like I was working on it at a certain time. I'd have to wear a blue hat. My contact, they would tell me, would be wearing a red baseball hat, and he would say a certain code, like walk up in the parking lot and go, "Are you having trouble?" And I'd say, "Yeah, I think it's the starter." And he'd get in the truck and start it, and then he'd say, "It's working good," and I'd shut the hood and then walk away. And my job after that was to call my principals then and let them know that the contact had arrived and the load had been transferred. Other than that, it's a need-to-know operation.
Yeah. So it's like, I think they call that a floating matrix. That's the way I heard of it before, that it's a floating matrix. People that just call up to do a job, you don't know anybody, you just do it and you go back to your normal job.
Yeah, that's how a lot of Black Ops work, because if anything sours up, the principals or the higher up, they have plausible deniability, and if you're caught, you're just a civilian criminal in whatever country you're in, and there's no ties to anything. They can call the State Department, they can talk to CIA, nobody knows anything.
Do you think your connections like this helped you get those jobs at Chevron Oil? And which got you the jobs first, or was it all interconnected? Because I have to say, the oil companies that I've had to deal with, the reason why I said I had to deal with, because I used to work for a defense contractor, and amazingly, I was astounded that a lot of our customers were oil companies. It's like, why do we have all these contracts with oil companies? So now that you're talking about oil companies, like, you know what, this kind of makes sense. Well, do you think? Yeah, because you get to travel around. You got the black gold, as they call it. You got the oil, and you're trading that around. But you can slip into places.
Well, yeah, that's true. They liked what I was doing. If you were working for the CIA and you're on a sanctioned op, they have what they call a NOC. That's a non-official cover. That means it's a non-government cover. You're an artist, you're a painter, you're a journalist, or whatever. And like an OCO, that's a official cover where you're a liaison to the State Department, or you're the deputy to some press secretary in an embassy in Libya or something like that. You have an official government cover, and that way you have diplomatic immunity in that country. So if you get caught doing things in the course of the operations, a lot of times the civilian law enforcement in the area won't stop you. You have a diplomatic immunity, and they use that quite a bit. But we were operating in the States, and we were doing CIA sanctioned jobs, but they were illegal, because when Reagan ordered the CIA director to begin those operations to arm the Nicaraguan Contras against the Sandinistas down there, that was an illegal domestic op. It had the president's backing, but CIA was forbidden to operate domestically in the U.S. Now, after the Patriot Act was passed in September 11th, after that deal, then they changed that law, and CIA was then able to operate domestically legally. But at that time, that's why they hired a lot of Black Ops guys and ex-military cutouts and stuff, because the op itself was illegal.
Well, all right, so you started doing these ops, like when? You told us you were at school, then you hung out with these Vietnam veterans, then you started your life, you graduated, became a professor, and then you started driving trucks around. You knew it was an op, but you didn't know what it was for, anything like that. They don't give you like a full, notebook of why you're doing anything, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, that's how Black Ops are. They're supposed to, a perfect Black Op, Rachael, is something that occurs in an area, and nobody knows that it goes on except for the people involved in it. And that doesn't always work that way, and there's blowback or mistakes and so forth. But the idea is to minimize blowback, keep everything secret, no ties, no SIGINT, that's signal intelligence, no FODINT, photographic intelligence. There's no trace, and then the op goes. And I was, in 1980, I was a petroleum geophysicist. I had about 19 people working under me, and we're in charge of projects like the Boat for Sea project in Alaska, and and offshore China and Saudi Arabia and Louisiana Gulf Coast offshore. So this was a perfect civilian front for me to conduct these operations.
Mm-hmm. And then what year was it, or when did the change occur in you? Were you just like, whoa, this is my life, this is what I'm doing? And were you proud of it, or was it just, tell me how you felt? Because this is amazing to me that somebody makes this transformation who says, I don't want to work for the government, and next thing you know, you're working for the government hardcore. How did that feel to make that transition?
Well, when you take a job from someone and they want you to do a point-specific mission, you don't necessarily care who they're working for. I mean, they're your principal, and a lot of times things are need to know, and you don't know, if they are working for the CIA or they're working for an oil company or they're working for whoever. You take the job and you complete it, and then you get paid. And that you try to maintain a need to know deal. You don't want to know too much, because if you're caught or captured or tortured, then you can't give up it's stuff that you don't know, and it gives the other time to clean up or do whatever they need to do.
Right. But at this point, you were still just in the United States, correct?
Right.
Okay. So did you think you were going to get tortured here?
Well, I don't know. You never know. When they showed me the content of some of the loads, after that, I started really thinking about it. At first, ignorance is bliss, but then I realized we were moving some serious military equipment. They were stealing it out of the armories, and they were cooling it off at safe houses, and then they were taking it over to the airport in Mena, where it was flown by pilots like Barry Seal. He was a C-123 plane. He called it the Fat Lady. It's a military transport plane in Rich Mountain Aviation, and that went down to arm the Contras.
Okay. All right. So I still want to know that. So this transformation occurred. How old were you when you realized what the heck you're doing? That's got to be a moment where you're like, okay, I'm here, I'm doing this thing. Here comes a $20,000 check from, well, that's the other question. Where's the check coming from?
Well, there's no check. We were always paid in cash. Sometimes,
that's nice.
Sometimes
that's
diamonds.
That's a nice perk.
Sometimes gold, sometimes silver. Nothing ever hit any of the banks. We were trained on how to launder money and wash money. And in a black op, you can't leave any trails, especially financial trails. And there wasn't any one point. I mean, I just started working and doing things, and as time went on, the jobs, got bigger and bigger and deeper, and then I developed a reputation where people would contact me, or my associates would recommend me for something. We did bodyguard jobs. We guarded safe houses. We did all kinds of things in the black op community.
Okay, so there's a community of these people.
Oh yeah, definitely. A lot of them are ex-military, and some of them were like me. They were just independents. Some of them were CIA assets, and then some people were actually case officers or agents, and then they wanted to do something on the side. They were on some kind of op they were doing, but they were going to do something on the side to make a little extra money. And so they would hire us to help them with that, but we weren't connected to their main op. So it's the black op community. There's people know people, and your name gets passed around amongst the people when they need certain jobs done.
So you could see how the CIA and the mafia got along pretty good.
Oh yeah, sure.
Because I live in Rhode Island, and I'm just going to say it. This place has been known to have pretty heavy mafia stuff going on in the past. We have definitely had this thing here called Plunder Dome, and that was a really big thing for a while. It was that bad. Our government and everything else was totally infiltrated by the mafia. But anyhow, so you can see how the CIA and the mafia kind of were a match made in heaven.
Yeah, it's not just that. It's also some of the bigger gangs. There's different gangs from Mexico. There's cartel people that liaison with the gangs. And so when you talk about, a black ops community, generally they deal with operations like moving drugs or moving arms or laundering money. the fingers, it's like a big octopus, the fingers just go everywhere. They go through the bankers. Some of these people are actually bankers, but like Ronald Rewald over in Hong Kong, he was actually a CIA agent, but his front was being in this big bank, and so it liaisons through all areas of society, and that's how this big octopus of the shadow government operates.
I believe it. Yep. All right, so let's take it through. So you figured out you're working for somebody. They go, here, take a bar of gold, and all of a sudden you're like, yeah, okay, I like that. I'll take this truck somewhere, and it kind of kept bumping up.
Right.
And then at some point, somebody contacted you, and that was the CIA that contacted you about the Murrah Building?
No, it was a contractor, and his name was Harold Leonard. When I began discussing this stuff, Rachael, I always quote the 1982 Intelligence Identities Protection Act. It's U.S. Code Title 50, Sections 421 and 426. It says the disclosure of a U.S. government operative's identity is illegal only if it's done intentionally and with knowledge that the government is still actively maintaining a cover for such operative. The reason we do that is you may have heard of the guy named John Kiriakou. He was a CIA case officer, and in January 2013, he got 30 months in federal prison because he was one of the whistleblowers of the CIA's RDI program, the Rendition, Detention, and Interrogation Program, centered out of Gitmo down in Guantanamo Bay. And he was talking about it and inadvertently gave an agent's name, and the guy was active, and that's against the law. You can't, if anyone's active, you can't give their name out. So I
take it Harold is not active.
Pardon me?
I take it Harold Leonard, the man that contacted you.
Yeah, Harold Leonard's dead.
Okay. All right, good.
That's why I'm saying
so you're not going to go to jail. You're not going to get tortured or anything. So okay.
No.
Okay.
So anyway, Harold had contacted me, and we met out in a wooded area up under the tree canopy, and he had $500,000 in a purple and black backpack. And he said, we've got a job for you. And I said, okay, where are we going? Saudi Arabia, wherever. He said, no, this one's here in the States. And I said, okay, well, what kind of job is it? And he said, it's an EOD job. That's explosives and demolition. And so I said, okay, what's the target? And he said, it's a building. I said, what kind of building? And he said, it's a federal building. I said, what? He said, yeah, which one? He said, it's the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. And at that point, that was in October of 1994, and I was getting at the end of my rope in this game. I had several broken bones and nerve damage and some serious injuries, and I had PTSD real bad from all of it and had begun drinking, to cover my PTSD. And I was operationally ineffective anyway, and I think that's why they wanted to kill two birds with one stone, just to have a patsy for the op and then get rid of me, because I knew too much. And so I turned that job down, and I told Harold Leonard, I said, you guys have gone too far this time. This is our own building. These are our own people, and I won't do it. And that's the point at where I turned from being an asset to a liability. And 2 days later, one of my handlers, his name was Duke Flaglier. He had done 2 tours in Nam, and then he was working for the CIA. He called me and said, you need to leave the country. And he said, now you know about an operation. We don't know when it's going to kick off, but now you're a liability. And he offered me the keys to his house in Belize and said we'd stage out of there. And so after that, it was about 6 months later that McVeigh detonated that truck bomb there on April 19th, 95. And I went black.
It took 6 months after you moved to Belize? That was that quick?
I was offered the job in October of 94.
94, yeah.
And then in April 19th of 95 is when the actual bombing took place.
Wow.
Yeah. So I knew about it, and so I figured they would probably kill me or do something worse. I went down to Oklahoma. We had a series of safe houses down there between Tulsa and Oklahoma City that we had used during the Centaur Rose Ops earlier in the 1980s over in Arkansas. So I stayed there, then I left the country for a while and came back. And by that time, McVeigh and Terry Nichols had been charged with, with the bombing.
Okay, so October 94, he contacts you. This is this Harold person. And then Duke Flaglier came up to you and said, "Look, man, you got to get out of Dodge. Go to my house in Belize."
Right.
April 1995, which is a few months later. You were already in Belize. Were you in Belize when this happened, or were you still floating around going to these safe houses?
I was up in Colorado when it happened, and then when I heard about it, I immediately went black because I had knowledge. I had knowledge that an operation was going on. That made me a liability.
Right.
And so I went down. I
ask another question now? We'll get to this too. Because how do you go black? I want to know how to do that.
Okay.
How do you do that?
It's called Tradecraft. And,
okay.
In Tradecraft, you have series of identities.
Okay.
You create what's called a legend. That's you have a fake history of what you were and what you're doing, and with documentation, credit cards, whatever, electric receipts, whatever you need to create the legend. But when you go black, generally you have disguises and you have fake IDs, and then you have a series of transportation or drop vehicles, that are not related, to your original identity.
Mm-hmm.
But that's called
is your name is your name Cody Snodgrass? Is that part of the? Is that a fake ID?
No.
Okay. All right, because I'm just looking at this whole thing. So going back to this original thing, you were working for the Petroleum. This was your cover, your non-official cover at that point, or your official cover.
Right.
When you're working for the Petroleum. Okay. Now, at that point, did they have you making the legend for yourself? With fake history and disguises and stuff?
Back then, look, when you're in Black Ops, Rachel.
Yeah. See, I don't know anything about this. This is why it's so fascinating. Go ahead, tell me everything.
It pays to have a series of false identities or safe houses to go to or drop vehicles in case you need some ground transportation somewhere. It also pays to have disguises so that if you have to go somewhere in a public place and something happens and then later on they go around and question the witnesses, they don't, you're already in a disguise, you have a false identity. That's just the way Black Ops work.
Right.
That way you can move around a lot, and if you're assigned to go somewhere, you can go there and be one person and then move off somewhere and do something else. Right. The idea is that there's no records and there's no blowback. There's no way to trace anything that happened. That's what a Black Op is. Right.
Did you have, I know it seems, I'm just fascinated by this whole thing. Did you have a disguise that you enjoyed more than others?
Not really. Sometimes we had operational requirements that we were told to be a certain kind of person or do a certain thing for whatever the op was, because, like I said, this went with on trust a lot. They would have what they call an umbrella op, where, like me, I would do one thing, and then they have two or three other people or operators doing something parallel to it all at the same time, but we wouldn't know who each other was, and we wouldn't know what each other were doing, but the principals that were running the op, they knew how to put it all together, and they had the reasons for separating it like that.
Right. Keep everybody compartmentalized.
Exactly.
So that you really don't know anything. You just go do your job and go on with your life.
Right.
Now, you had said when this Harold Leonard contacted you that you asked him, is it in another country? And you hadn't been in another country yet, had you?
Well, at that time in 1994, yes, I've been in several other countries.
Oh, like where?
Well, I'm going to tell you a few of them. I'm not going to tell you all of them.
Oh no, we don't have that much time. But go ahead, yeah, please do.
I've been in Japan and Saudi Arabia, South America, all through Central America, up through Canada, over in Europe, and I've been to different places, yeah.
Oh, so basically all over the world. Yeah, it sounds pretty intense. Now, you were still the petroleum geophysicist while you were traveling all around?
No.
No.
That was only in the early 80s when I needed that cover. And then after that, 82 through 85, I quit that. I didn't need the cover, and I just went totally into Black Ops.
Oh. All right, so you gave up the teaching and all that other stuff. You said, "Screw this! I don't care about the pension."
Well, yeah, when you need a cover, you can create one or get a job or whatever you need to do to cover up the ops. But sometimes in the 80s, we were so busy with stuff, I didn't have time, and I didn't need the cover anyway. So you dispense with it and go on. I was making a lot more money than. As a geophysicist, I was only making about $50,000 a year then, and that's nothing compared. We had some jobs in Saudi Arabia where we made $50,000 a month.
Yeah, I bet. So, this is, like I said, I'm fascinated with this part. So you've gone black. You've got this legend. You've created the legend. You've got the fake history. You've got the disguises, and you're going around all over the world, and people through this community that you don't even know too much, and they're paying you with gold and cash, and this sounds very, very, this is like kind of a dream lifestyle for a lot of people.
In West Africa, Sierra Leone and West Ivory Coast, we had a job over there that they pay in diamonds because that's the currency, the blood diamonds. Mm-hmm. It's a big thing over there. So whatever country you're in or whatever op, we had an op in Ho Chi Minh City, which was Saigon, just after the war. The U.S. pulled out after 75 there, and then later on, they were cleaning out the countryside. They reunited the North and the South. They were cleaning up all the old unexploded ordnance and the mines and booby traps and all the stuff, and there was an op there to move some of those old Soviet-style weapons over to the Middle East, and so we got paid to do that. But yeah, it's Black Ops.
Okay, so that though doesn't sound sneaky. Moving the old stuff. That almost sounds like a military defense contractor.
Well, yeah. The job was they had all that old ordnance over there from the war, and they were cleaning up the countryside, and arms is a big business. So
that's true. That's absolutely true.
There's other people, that wanted all that old stuff, and you just hook the buyers up and move it. Mm-hmm. And everybody makes money.
So you personally were like putting the people together, like finding the people to buy this stuff, or were you just there digging it up?
Well, no, they had a guy there that had been Special Forces, and he stayed in Vietnam, got out of the military, and he got the first import-export license that was ever granted by the new communist government when they took over South Vietnam, and so he was in a good position to be able to gather stuff there and then export it through his company as a front.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
See, everything has a front. Everything, is mixed in
all these
with legitimate.
Yeah, sure.
And then the money, if it's big money, it's laundered through oil business stuff like the Saudis or whatever, and it's all washed through the legitimate above board or what we call vanilla operations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right now I'm still in the vanilla land. But like I said, I want to go into the dark world there with the dark. I want to like disappear pretty soon. I want to literally do that. Now, here's my next question. Let's get back to the Murrah Building. Mm-hmm. So Harold Leonard comes up to me. He says, we've got this thing. And you said, is it in another country? And he said, no, it's here. And you said you'd already been in Japan, Saudi Arabia, Canada, all these other places. And just something in your head said, look, I can go somewhere else and blow something up, but I can't blow up a federal building here. And that's when, like, the veneer that you had created started to crack. Yes?
Well, no, it's just a patriotic thing. I mean, my stepdad, he was in the 25th Infantry, took his basic at Fort Hood, Texas, and then he was at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, at Schofield Barracks on December 7th, 41, and survived the Great Attack there, and then went to fight the Battle of Guadalcanal in November, the late winter of 42. And I was a patriotic American. I mean, I did Black Ops, and I did a lot of bad things, but I drew the line at doing it here in our own country.
Right, right. I can understand that.
Because
anybody that's in the military, that's what you do. You just go out there and you do what you got to do, so long as back here is safe. And that's why you're doing it, so that back here is safe. Yeah,
and the military guys, they're under no obligation to, if they get an order, if it's an extrajudicial, unconstitutional order, then they don't necessarily have to follow it. I mean, if you're given a job like Lieutenant Cowley at the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, and you go in there and you start wasting civilians, innocent women and children, that's where there's a line in there. I mean, you can conduct military operations in there to weed out the enemy like the NVA or the Viet Cong, but when you start crossing that line and wasting and killing innocent civilians, women and children and stuff, then there's a line there. And it's a fine line, and the line between patriotism and treason in the Black Ops world is very, very fine sometimes.
Yeah, it's almost a gray line, sort of a gray line.
Yeah.
Now, when I posted that I was going to have you on the show, lots of people started contacting me because they heard you and they were my listeners have my back. They're really cool. The people listening to this show. They asked if you had ever read a book by Terry Reid called "Compromised: Clinton, Bush, and the CIA."
I have read that book.
Yeah, because they said you sound a lot like that's what he's talking about in that book.
Well, there was lots of people involved in those operations. I didn't actually see all the money myself, but I was told by my higher-ups that at the height of like that Centaur Rose op, they were moving approximately $100 million a month in cocaine. They were taking arms down into Central America, because the Soviets were pouring arms into the Sandinistas, and so we were trying to arm the Contras, and they didn't want the balance of power to tip, the domino theory thing and everything, and they were bringing the drugs back to pay for the op. So,
yeah,
there's a lot of people involved in those operations.
Yeah, I bet.
I'm just one little guy that drove some trucks and moved some loads of stuff, and I also guarded safe houses. We had a guy that was in the Little Rock National Guard in the Armory there, and back then they didn't have computers, Rachael, like they do now, and it was easier to fudge the ledgers, and they stole a lot of military equipment out of there, and then there was a farm that another associate had south of Little Rock, and we'd take the ordnance there and let it cool off a little while. Then we'd move it over to the safe houses between Tulsa and Oklahoma City and let it sit, because there'd always be an investigation, after a lot of that stuff disappeared. And while they were fading the heat on that, we'd sit there and then wait for orders. Whenever the orders come, then we would take the stuff back over to Arkansas.
Mm-hmm. And which year is that? Because I'm making a timeline right here in my
notebook
notebook of your life.
Between, say, 82 to 85, roughly.
Okay, so
that op was ongoing over years, and then the Jade Bridge, that was a thing where they were training the Nicaraguan pilots on how to fly, and they offered me a job down there in Nicaragua to do hand-to-hand combat, because I had a lot of martial arts, so they offered me a job down there to train some of those guys, and I didn't have time to do that. It wasn't enough money, so I stayed up here in the States.
Okay, so that 1982 to 85. You were over Amoco, no?
I was at Amoco in 80, 81, and then I quit. I quit that so I could devote full time in the mid-80s to what we were doing.
Okay. Because like I said, I'm taking copious notes. I know everything you say because it's so fascinating. All right, so now I have one more question too, because when people saw that you were going to be on my show, Are you friends with my guest from last week, Field McConnell from Able Danger?
No, I never met him. I never heard of him, in fact, until sometime last week when we started doing these interviews. One of the people from one of the radio stations sent an email in and said, "You need to talk to Field McConnell," and I didn't know who he was. I didn't know anything.
Yeah, because quite frankly, last week I really didn't know much about Field McConnell. Next thing you know, you and I meet up, and then I start getting emails, and people are sending messages, and it looks like about both of you. So I didn't know if I was in some sort of email loop that was. I was like, "What the heck's going on?" So okay, you don't know him. All right, thank you. Now next thing. I want to still go on with this Murrah Building because this is really the crux of the biscuit. And I've just been careening on with all these questions because it's so fascinating to me. All right, so, and I probably shouldn't sound so happy about this because this is actually pretty freaky.
Well, yeah, Rachel, when that building did go off, it killed 168 people. And
children.
It injured about 680 more.
Yeah.
And then it damaged 324 buildings in the area, about a 16-block radius. Mm-hmm. And it burned like 86 cars or so and shattered glass in 258 buildings. And it also caused, after it was all said and done, a rough estimate of the damages, total damage was about $652 million. So you're right, it was a very sad thing.
Yeah. And I showed the movie A Noble Lie, which is a movie of documentary done by Free Mind Films. I showed that twice at the library, the public library.
Oh,
and
yeah.
that kind of blew people's minds. The reason why I showed that is because it did kind of lay the groundwork for what happened on 9/11.
Right, exactly.
And the other thing that reason why I showed that, I mentioned I work for this defense contractor. Everybody, all the higher ups at this defense contractor, literally, I don't know, it was probably maybe June or July. I don't think it was August, but it was close. Maybe it was August. All the higher ups where I had worked, they all went to the memorial for Oklahoma City, like literally like a month or two before 9/11 happened. And I kind of always felt like, why did they send them all? Like it was out of nowhere. Like, oh, let's all just go to this memorial. And that just seems so odd to me that they were trying to prep people for the mindset. Like, oh, remember when this happened? Like how, that sort of. So anyhow. So, yeah, it was pretty tough because, so I showed that film, A Noble Lie, which if anybody hasn't seen it, you really should see it. It used to be free on the internet, or Alex Jones was running it or something, but I think they got into some sort of financial battle about the thing. And Free Minds Film, you can buy it and you could rent it. I think it's online.
Yeah, the filmmaker for that is Chris Emery, if I'm saying his name right. Chris Emery.
That's right. Yep. Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
I think people should look at that. That's a pretty decent overview of. And then, from your perspective, though, like you said, you're in this floating matrix situation. You really didn't get to know why they were doing this. They just come in to talk to you because they knew you were trustworthy, and also because you thought you were kind of a little long in the tooth, and they sort of wanted to use you as a patsy.
Well, yeah, April. Rachel, when you're first approached, generally in a Black Ops job, they will first ask you if you want to do it, and then they don't give you a lot of the operational parameters of the job. And once you accept it and say, yes, I'm willing to take on this job, then later they provide the intelligence about why, what, who, or where. But if you turn it down that way you're not that much of a liability because you really didn't know anything in the first place. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So as a general procedural rule with a Black Op, they will approach you and they'll say, are you interested in this or that? And then if you answer in the affirmative, then they'll say, okay, well, here's the details. Here's the timeline. We need it done this way. We need it done that way, blah, 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 blah.
So where were you on that list? Were you just at the initial contact, or did they start telling you about how it was going to go down?
No, I don't know. I was approached by Harold Leonard, and he said it's $500,000 now, 500,000 jobs done, and I turned it down. I didn't want anything to do with it. I was on my way out, and I eventually retired in March of 1995. That was 1 month before the Murrah Building blew up. I didn't know when it was going to blow up. I just know there was a job and that I turned it down. It just so happened that I retired 1 month before it actually happened.
All right, retired from the black world there, the Black Ops world?
Right.
Okay, so how does that work? Do you put the call out to everybody, or you just put up a flag in your front yard and say I'm no longer working, or how does that work?
Yeah. When I turned that job down, I went from an asset to a liability, and then I contacted some of my principals and higher-ups, different people I'd worked for over the years, and told them that I was quitting because I was not operationally effective anymore.
Okay,
I got
you made the call.
I had nerve damage down my legs, and I've got nerve damage in my arms, and fractured vertebrae, and broken ribs, and head injuries, and all kinds of things that happened over the the last 20 years. So.
And that was all in the line of this Black Ops stuff, or was this?
Yeah, and we had bodyguard jobs.
Right.
One of them we talk about in the book was back in '88 with Barry Sadler. He was shot September 8th of 1988 down in Guatemala City, and he had been with the 20th Special Forces group back in '63. He took his training, then he went to Vietnam, and he got injured in Pleiku. And while he was recovering at the Subic Bay Medical Facility, he wrote that famous song, "The Ballad of the Green Beret." And for the older crowd, back in 1965, that was the #1 hit single in the country back then. And so he had been doing arms deals down there, and had a CI assassin that shot him. He shot him in the back of the head 2 weeks before I was deployed to go down there. And but I had bodyguard jobs like that and different ones throughout the time. So all that story's in the book,
Okay. Yeah, well, we haven't mentioned the book on this show.
Okay.
So you're doing a book. All right.
Yeah.
Now you say we talk about in the book. Here's that we again. Who's we? You and?
Well, when I say we, I talk about I'm talking about me and my guardian angel. Because I died twice in ops, and they had to shock me back. My heart stopped and flatlined twice. And when I died, I had a near-death experience and floated over myself in the hospital. And I have a guardian angel that I met there. She saved my life on a number of occasions. She's the only reason I'm alive now. Like one of my associates, on his first tour in Vietnam, the VC were throwing up a satchel charge. They were going along a trail in the thick jungle, and he said he heard a woman's voice in his head and felt hands like pushing him down, and the voice said, get down now. And so he fell face first on the ground, and then they threw up that satchel charge and killed a lot of the guys in his platoon. But he says his guardian angel saved his life. And I know I've got several soldiers that were from Iraq and Afghanistan and Nam and different places that have had similar things. They had a visit or some kind of a spiritual epiphany where they were warned ahead of time. Some of them had dreams or they have a dream ahead of time, and then they know not to be somewhere. And those things save their lives. So that's what happened to me. So when I say we, that's what I'm talking about.
Ah, great. All right, in this book that we, the guardian angel and you, wrote together.
It's called Choosing the Light, Dark Secrets of the Oklahoma City Bombing. And that bombing job, when they offered it to me and I decided that I was going to quit and not do that anymore, that's why I titled it that, because that's the point at where I chose the light and I chose to do good. I didn't want to hurt people or do bad things anymore, and the money didn't matter to me. There's a point to where your soul gets crushed, and you see so much darkness and ugliness that I was drinking real heavily. I have severe PTSD, and I'm 100% totally and permanently disabled now, is what my medical files say. So I'd been in a lot of rough stuff, and I survived, barely survived. So that's when I say we, and I wrote that book because I decided one day that if I ever made it through all this stuff, I would come clean and tell the truth.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you did, and I'm glad you're on my show to announce this. I want to talk more about the guardian angels,
Okay.
especially when we come after the break. The break's going to be in about 4 or 5 minutes. Now, that was the moment. That was the moment that you said, I'm not going to do this anymore. And that's what I want to talk about.
Okay.
So that was October 94. Harold Leonard came and talked to you. And then April 95 is when the bombing happened in Oklahoma City. And we can also talk about, because I've heard you talk about some of the reasons why that building got blown up.
Yeah, that's some amazing stuff that a lot of people don't know. The mainstream media, they put the big kibosh on all that, and they put out the standard lies and propaganda, but the real reasons why they conducted that op are pretty amazing to most people.
Yeah. One of them had to do with, one of the reasons I heard you say had to do with the exposure that the people in the first Iraq war to radiation.
Right.
And they were having the, Desert Storm kind of, not post-traumatic stress, but like it was written off as post-traumatic stress, but it was physical problems.
Yeah, I'd like to go through the timeline on that, but we don't have time before the break, but I can tease it a little bit and just give you...
Yeah, tease it. Go ahead. Tease us. Go ahead.
Yeah, there was... the main reasons that building were taken down had to do with records storage. And a lot of the records from the operations in the early and mid-'80s over in Arkansas... Mm-hmm. When Bill and Hillary were there, she was running the Rose Law Firm, and Bill Clinton was the governor. They were running front for the big CIA op there, the 3 ops that we talked about earlier. And those ops have been going on for a number of years, so domestic law enforcement got involved. And there was whole big troves of files from the ABI, that's the Arkansas Bureau of Investigation, the state police, DEA, IRS, all these files that had been accumulated, investigations going on about what was going on there, had been stored at the Little Rock FBI field office. And just prior to the Murrah Building detonating, they were moved over there. And they had a lot to do with the Whitewater investigation that Congress had started that back in 1994. That was July 26th of 1994. The Whitewater investigation began in Congress, and they were going to subpoena a lot of those records. And then later on, when Bill Clinton's impeachment came up, those records could have played a key part in that, and they all disappeared when the Murrah Building went. But the biggest thing has to do with the Gulf War Syndrome records of approximately 480,000 veterans that were stored there. And we can go into the timeline of what happened and why it was so important that those records be destroyed.
Yeah. We got 1 minute till we come into this break, but that's pretty amazing to me because I'm in Generation X, which is the Gulf War. The first Gulf War was basically my generation's war. There was the trading cards. I remember they had trading cards for the Gulf War.
Right.
It was my first husband. He was there, and his friend, one of his best friends, he and his best friend were there. They were Marines, and they came back and complained of Gulf War syndrome. And his friend complained that when he ejaculated, it burned.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, God, you guys are just being crazy, And I didn't believe it. But
yeah, what we'll do on the other side of the break.
Go ahead. Yeah, after this break, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about this Gulf War syndrome. We're going to talk about books, Choosing the Light, and we'll talk more about the Murrah Building and everything. This is going to be great. Everybody, hang on till after the break. Come on back. Okay, we're back in hour 2 of Shadow Citizen. We're here tonight with Cody Snodgres. and he's a 20-year veteran of black operations here in the United States, or Black Ops, as they call them. And his claim to fame is that he has come forth and said that he was approached to bomb the Murrah Building in Oklahoma City. And last hour, we talked pretty much at length about how he kind of morphed into being just really good at physics, getting approached by the CIA. He said he didn't want to work for the government. He said he didn't want to work for them. And then somehow, some way, he fell in with people, some Vietnam vets who were working for the government in kind of black operations. And then, meanwhile, he went on to complete school. He got his math and physics degree, and he started working at Chevron, Amoco. He was a geophysicist. And while all that was going on, he was working undercover. And we talked about that quite a bit in the first hour. So if you missed that, listen to the replay. This is going to be on Vimeo, SoundCloud, BitChute, iTunes, YouTube. It'll be on the archive sections at American Freedom Radio and over at shadowcitizen.online. So I can't wait to hear this myself, to hear it replayed. We're going to talk to Cody. Cody, you're still here with us, right?
Yes, we're here. How's my signal? Is it good?
All right. You sound great.
Okay.
I'm so glad. Okay, now, in this hour, we were going to pick up where we left off right before the break, talking about the Gulf War syndrome stuff. And like I said, this touches me because this is my generation. This is our war. And this is when people started realizing later on, not while we were in the middle of the war, but maybe this next iteration of it, the most current Gulf War, that something maybe wasn't so great about this Iraq thing. So let's go back to the first Gulf War and what it has to do with the Murrah Building.
Right, yeah, and this is really important. We're going to go through just a quick, basic little history. A lot of people don't know this, but Saddam Hussein was on the CIA payroll and when he was head of the Ba'ath Party there, and he came to power in Iraq. And then, as you probably recall, there was the Iraq-Iran war. Mm-hmm. And during that time, Iran's a lot bigger country, and they had approximately a 10-to-1 infantry advantage. And so Donald Rumsfeld was Secretary of the State back then, and he had been, over there helping them with satellite intel and different things, because Saddam was our ally at that point. And then to keep the balance of power between those two countries in case Iraq was overrun in the Reagan administration, they covertly armed him. And that's part of the Iran-Contra scandal. But anyway, to make a long story short, the two basic ways they armed him was first with the Ames strain of anthrax. It was made at Fort Detrick, Maryland. It was a weaponized grade of anthrax. It had a smaller spore size and an altered protein code on the outside to make it more readily absorbable. What they did to weaponize it was increase its infectious rate. And so they gave him this stuff covertly, and the second thing they gave him was copies of the Hawkeye 123C cluster bombs. They were one of the most efficient types of ordnance for air-to-ground infantry engagements. And so we stole the plans, basically, and took them down to Argentina, and they had a front guy build them down there, and they had to get zirconium. That's one of the elements that makes all that work, and it's on the restricted export list here in America, so they forged up the agricultural reports and blended it all in and got him the zirconium, and so they made those and sent them through Africa over to Saddam. So here he was sitting with some of our ordnance covertly. The American people didn't know it. And then later on, after the war was over, Saddam invaded Kuwait. And when that happened, it made the Saudis real nervous, and they started putting pressure on our government. And so the plan was cooked up, to go throw Saddam out. He was a former asset, and now he turned liability. And just like me, just like a lot of people that fall out of favor. And so what happened was there was a 6-month course of anthrax injections for our military. And they each got one shot a month over 6 months to help build up the immunity because it's a very virulent strain. And so they didn't have time, Rachel. The timeline was to go over there by January of 91, and they couldn't wait around 6 months while everyone got their anthrax vaccine. So what they did was they created a new vaccine, and it was one shot in 1 month. But to make it, boost it up and shorten the time, they used a new adjunct called squalene. And as you probably know, in our flu vaccines, they had Therasol, which I think was the mercury-based stuff, and then aluminum. These were adjuncts, which are autoimmune boosters in the human body. So squalene had never been used too much, and so they put it in the vaccines, and they waived FDA testing because they were in a hurry. So they gave it to all of our troops, and in the book I have the story and the lot numbers. The first group that got it was Dover Air Force Base, the pilots and stuff, and gradually most everybody that went over there got it. And this caused all kinds of problems, which would later be called the Gulf War syndrome. But there was a lot of autoimmune problems, nausea, shaking, dizziness, vomiting, long-term neurological degradation, and so forth. And so while our guys were fighting over there, a second thing happened. In January 91, when that war kicked off, that was the first war that the U.S. military had used depleted uranium weapons. Mm-hmm. And you recall the Vietnam veterans, that was the first war over there. They had used dioxin as a defoliant from DuPont Chemical, and that turned out to have really long-term effects. That was in Operation Ranch Hand when they started spraying that, and I think 69 to 71 is when that op was going on. But you fast forward into Iraq now, and they'd all gotten their anthrax shots, and a lot of them were getting sick. And then they got over there, and they were breathing all the oil well fires Saddam had set. There was smoke and sand and crap everywhere. Also, the depleted uranium was being used, and the two primary uses of that were the A-10 Warthogs. They were the jets, the tank buster jets. They had 30-millimeter chain guns on them with the DU rounds. And I know some pilots here that were over there. They're working for CIA now in the Space Command, but at Schreiber Air Force Base. But they use that ordnance from the air, and then on the ground, tank commanders like Timothy McVeigh. He was a tank commander, M1A1 Abrams tank commander. He won a Bronze Star there for confirmed kills. But they used those rounds, and they had about a 9-inch rod of depleted uranium in the Sabot rounds, a real high kinetic velocity of about 5,200 feet per second. And they had enough kinetic energy, Rachel, to Saddam's primary tank was a T-54 Soviet tank, and it would hit that turret and weighed approximately 11 tons. And when these things hit the turret, it had so much energy, it'd spin it up like a tumbleweed. And what was happening was these big fireballs were being created, and there were new elements being formed. Like I said, it's the first time they ever used this stuff. And some of it was like uranium oxide, uranium dioxide, and the particulate size, Rachel, was down to 4 microns. And our MOP gear, our NBC and our gas mask for our troops only went down to 10 microns. So what was happening was this brand new ordnance was being used. It was creating these toxins. And then our guys would walk through the sand and all the stuff being stirred up and breathe it through their filters, but the filters weren't stopping it. Mm-hmm. And so these very tiny particles were going in to our troops, and generally radiation, when it accumulates in the human body, accumulates in the thyroids, and then down in the testicles if you're a male, or the ovaries, if you're a woman, the reproductive. And so what was happening, our guys were coming back, and girls too, or women. They were all coming back, and they had this anthrax thing. The shots were making them sick, and then this depleted uranium was coming. And when the soldiers got home and made love to their wives, there was actually toxins being transmitted in the semen. That's why you said, they were burning when they ejaculated, because the stuff was in their body. And see, nobody knew it back then, because this was just the first time it had been used. And so then it was being transferred into the women, and from the women into the children, and from the children, and God knows how many generations it was going to go on. And the Pentagon had on its hands a medical fiasco. I mean, you're looking at multi-generational medical bills. And so Chris Shays was a Republican senator from Connecticut, and he was on an Armed Services Committee. And by 1994, just before the Murrah Building blew up, all these Gulf War syndrome guys were going sick. They were going to the VA. There was medical problems everywhere. It was turning into a big mess, just like the Vietnam vets when Agent Orange started showing up. Mm-hmm. And so the Pentagon had to cover this up somehow. And so Chris Shays ordered the FBI to go around and gather the records, Rachael, of all these sick Gulf War veterans, and they were going to put them together into a medical culpability hearing. And they knew our vets were sick. They didn't quite understand what all was going on. The Pentagon was trying to cover it all up. And Chris Shays says, we're going to get you guys some money. Well, all those medical records were stored at the Alfred P. Murrah Building. And then when it blew up, those medical records disappeared. But not all the bombs went off in the Murrah Building. There were 3 of them. 1 of them detonated, and 2 of them didn't. And there was eyewitnesses of teams taking the files out. They knew right where they were, and when the building didn't detonate the way it was supposed to, they went in there and had to take care of those records another way. But we had someone ask us, well, how do you know those records are there? I didn't see them myself, of course, but later on, in September 19th of 1996, they had congressional hearings on Gulf War syndrome. And the DOD admitted, and I've got a copy of this in the appendix of the book, the Department of Defense at those congressional hearings admitted that over 400,000 Gulf War syndrome records had, quote, disappeared. So when the medical records were lost, they couldn't come up with payments, based on the records. And so the Pentagon was conveniently off the hook in hundreds of billions, maybe even trillions of long-term intergenerational medical problems. Uranium-238 has a half-life of about 4.5 million years, and they didn't know how this would be transferred from father to mother, mother to son, right, son to son, on down. So that's one of the main reasons they conducted that op.
Oh, brother. All right. Well, this Chris Shays guy, he was a congressman from Connecticut. And
I think he's a Republican.
Right. Yeah, he was Republican. He was the only Republican congressman in New England at that time.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
And just so everybody knows, he had a really hard time in 2009, because I'm from this area. I've heard about this. He worked pretty closely with my congressman, who was the senior congressman in Connecticut at that time, who's also Sam the congressman in my book. That everybody that's listening to this knows that I have a series of books called Security Through Absurdity, which is a fictionalized version of what I lived through, living it through that defense contractor and through 9/11 and everything else. So I'm familiar with Chris Shays because he was familiar. And I was in the Chris Shays is over in the Bridgeport area of Connecticut. I was over in the New London, New Haven area of Connecticut. Yeah. So he had a hard time because, I'm not to laugh, but in 2009, somebody stole a lot of money from his campaign, and the legal bills were way more than I think it was, legal fees were over $300,000, and I think his campaign, somebody snagged over, I'm not even sure if they came out what the total was, but the rest of his career was like kind of chasing money all the time.
Yeah.
So just because you mentioned his name and I know who this person is, but yeah, he was very, very pro all of the Iraq adventures all the way.
Yeah, he was at that time back in '96 during those hearings in '94. It had been about 3 years after the Gulf War was over in '91, and the symptoms, are slow to develop with this low-level radiation, just like Agent Orange. The symptoms are slow depending upon your exposure rate, and then some of them, if it's real low-level exposure, it doesn't show up. It sits dormant in the liver and the pancreas and stuff, and it doesn't show up for 20, 30 years. And then it manifests in cancers and all kinds of things. But 3 years was enough time for the anthrax stuff to show up, and then just the beginnings of this radiation poisoning that everyone was bringing back. And they didn't know it. They put on their mop gear believing that they were being protected. And the whole time, they were being protected by some things, but not from this low-level radiation.
Yeah, and then they got the anthrax shots. They changed that up, the anthrax shots, later for the second Gulf War, because the next guy I got involved with, he was there in the second war, and he had to they went to give him the anthrax shots, and they told him, "Oh, you're immune to this. You're immune to anthrax. We don't have to give these to you." Which we thought that's just strange.
That is strange. Yeah.
That is so. To this day, I'm like, what the heck was that all about? But he didn't have to take the shot, but he had to take all these other shots, and he's like, he was so sick from it for many, many days.
Yeah,
so They just pump you up.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's the long-term effects though that started showing up years later. I know several veterans that their hands shake. They have autoimmune. They have nervous problems, trouble sleeping, depression, a wide variety of things that are not related to the drugs the VA gives them, like Prozac or any of that. It's just the long-term effects of all these toxins.
Yeah, and the kick in the pants part is that second Iraq war, the guy I'm talking about, he was a contractor, so you couldn't go to the VA.
Exactly. And see, I know guys that were in Benghazi at the embassy that night. All that stuff happened. We tell that story on some of those stations. There's so much here. It's like we said before. It's like a big octopus with all these tentacles going off into all these different branches. The pharmaceutical, like Bioport, they got the first contracts to do the squalene vaccine. It branches off into the pharmaceuticals, the banks, the weapons manufacturers. It's a big octopus of shadow government affairs.
Yeah. This is completely almost off topic, but how, from your perspective, can this ever be stopped, any of the shadow government stuff?
Yeah, there's a possibility, but, it's like a big snowball. Individual presidents here in America come and go, but the shadow government remains. And after 1947, when Alan Dulles was director of the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, that's the predecessor to the CIA, after the nuclear weapons were detonated in August 6th and 9th in 45 in Japan, that really changed the whole world. And that type of power, Rachael, that immense power, I think it really pushed the deep state and the secrecy even harder. And then we got in the space race with the Russians and Sputnik and all that. And then all the new technologies with computers and encryptions and weapon systems, missile telemetry, submarines, everything just morphed like Eisenhower warned us, in that famous speech he made about the military-industrial complex. All this technology and everything pushed the deep state and fueled it. And the way to win and maintain power was to go secret and to have black ops and to do all of these things like mind control and MK Ultra, the Stargate program, the remote viewing things. And so to answer your question, I don't know where all this is going to lead, but one thing I do know is that if we don't have some light and some transparency and some truth, that we will fall completely into a shadow government. It'll be like an Orwellian nightmare where we all get microchips and there's very little freedom. So we have to have some kind of light to stop this. It's like a spiritual war between light and dark. And the dark is the shadow, the secretive, the deception, and, Kennedy assassination and all the 9/11 and all of it. If we don't stand up for the light and demand truth. You know, President Kennedy, Rachael, said that secrecy is repugnant to a free society.
That's right.
The very word secrecy. And so your answer is, I don't know. I think we're at this right now. You know, Trump's got all those indictments they're doing. He said he was going to drain the swamp and all of that. I don't know if he's going to be able to. He's just one man. He's got a good team with him. But the corruption, like you said, is so endemic. It's so systemic. I saw it from the inside, and it's horrible. I mean, it's based on greed, human greed. How do you stop that?
Yeah, I don't know. So
one
if
person,
the way to I guess what you said, the showing the light. So shows like mine where people are just talking about stuff have got to be helpful.
Yeah, one guy, we were doing a John B. Wells interview, Caravan to Midnight. That's a great show. It's got a lot of good stuff in it. And John asked me, he said, well, you know, what can you do? What can we do against this? Because, I mean, it's almost overwhelming. And I said, well, from an individual viewpoint, it doesn't matter who you are, you know, where you work, how much money you make. You know, you can be a burger cook or a banker, a multi-million-dollar offshore banker, an investment banker. What we have to do, each of us, is to begin inside our own hearts and choose the light, to pick, you know, truth and integrity and honesty, and try at least to manifest that, because when you open your heart to that light, it brings in that higher creative forces, the higher spiritual forces of light, and we can manifest those on the earth. If 10 people do it, nobody cares. You know, if 1 million people do it, it starts to make a difference. And if 10 million or 20 million people start doing that, then it will change the world. But we have to not be crippled by fear. Like me, I was afraid. I kept quiet for 20-something years, 22 years about this Oklahoma City thing. I didn't want to talk when Bill Clinton was president or Hillary Clinton was president, because I know a lot of inflammatory things about them, things they're trying to hide from the American people. And so when they got out of power and she was not Secretary of State, now it's the time is right for us to, you know, pull up all this shadow stuff, get it out in the open, and I hope they get prosecuted, because I think they're criminals.
It is pretty amazing that they haven't, that a lot of these people are still walking around like normal people. I swear to God, if it was just you or me or anybody normal, we'd be in jail. It'd be all over.
Oh, yeah, sure. And
like a long time ago, but this keeps dragging. They keep dragging this out, and it turns into this big drama, and it goes on and on and on, almost like it's entertainment for people to watch.
Yeah, and you ask, you know, the Justice Department is skewed, you know. Regular people like us, we get tickets for no seatbelt or something like that. Yeah. And the Clintons, they can get away with all this big stuff and nobody says anything. We have to demand that our justice system, you know, be more fair. There's always corruption in government. I mean, it doesn't matter what country you're in. But our last few decades here, since John Kennedy got shot, I was in Dallas, by the way, when that happened.
Get out.
Yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah, I can tell you that story here if you want later. But anyway, John asked us what we could do, and the first thing you can do is hold the light for yourself and manifest that on the earth. And if enough people can do that and get over the greed and all that other stuff, then we'll begin to make a difference. But we have to change human consciousness fundamentally. You can make all these systems come from the outside, and then like Trump, he can drain the swamp now and get rid of a bunch of corrupt Democrats or corrupt Republicans or whatever. And if you don't change the system they operate in, the fundamental system itself, in 10 or 20 years, the corruption will spring back up.
Heck, probably the next voting cycle.
Oh yeah, it may not even take that long. But so it's a big problem. I don't pretend to have all the answers to it.
No, I wouldn't.
But I think that if each of us can begin, you know, like I did, I stepped out of the black world and I tried to. We run a healing center now, and I do things of the light, and we work on veterans for free. We never charge money. I have severe PTSD, so I'm in a good position to help them with theirs. We try to get them off the Prozac and all the SSRI, serotonin reuptake inhibitor drugs the VA gives them, and and all of that, and get them off the bottle and alcohol, and help them readapt to society. So, in my world, I went from the dark to the light, and I try to do good now and try to help people and speak the truth when I can. And if enough people do that, in mass, our world will change. But until that point, I don't know, Rachel, how this is going to turn out. All I know is we got to try.
Yeah.
It's our children. It's our children and our grandchildren. My life's basically over. I'm 61, and I'm all disabled and beat up and stuff. But it's the young people. What kind of world are we going to go hand down to them?
Well, all I know is that, I've got 11-year-olds, or 12-year-olds, and I went to art school in Boston, so you could say my background is, people would say, oh, you're liberal. Well, now how old am I now? I'm not going to say, but I'm old enough now to know that what we're showing the kids, and I threw my television out while I was working for that defense contractor. I said, this stuff on TV, it's all made up. It's trying to get people to buy stuff, and especially to get stock prices to go up and down. So at that point, I threw out the television. My children have never had a television in this house. However, YouTube now, I watched it the other day with them. The stuff that they're showing the kids as kid-friendly is disturbing. And on top of that, I homeschooled my kids until 6th grade. They went into 6th grade to public school, and I'm astounded by the base level of things that kids in America that's just normal for kids. These entertainment things, the education things. And when you said it's up to the kids, I'm like, good God, they've really kicked it down a couple notches.
Yeah, it's a concerted, deliberate program to dumb down the children so that they're easier to control. And, it's just like fluoridating the water. That was first cooked up with the Nazis over there at those camps, Auschwitz and stuff, Dachau and all of them, where they fluoridated the water and it made the prisoners docile. And they wanted them to work and be smart enough to do menial jobs, but not smart enough to escape. And it's a similar kind of thing. Our whole education system has been deliberately molded by the New World Order elite to help create a nation of easily controllable, basically slaves. That may be too strong a word, but
no, it's right. You're right. You're absolutely right. I agree with you, and it makes me sad.
And so then when they have a new war coming up, like Vietnam or Iraq or whatever it is, then the guys can go over there and they'll get their anthrax shots and stuff and not know what's happening to them. They won't question anything. Then when they get sick later on, after they've been used like Kleenexes by the Pentagon, and they go, oh, wow, something's wrong. What happened? But they teach us not to question. They teach us to accept authority, and the whole education system, in my opinion, is in a really bad way.
Mm-hmm.
I know I used to teach, college freshmen. I had 3 classes.
That's right. You told us that in the first hour. You're a professor.
Yeah, and so I saw the kind of quality of people. This was, back in the early 80s, late 70s. I saw the stuff coming out of the education system then, but now you fast forward now to like your kids in the year 2010 on up, it's radically different. It's a lot worse than it was back then.
Yeah, but the other thing is you're thinking to yourself, what type of work are they going to get into? Because first off, college is so expensive if you're going to send them to college. Second off, the robots are coming up right now. Everything's kind of automated. And I really feel like office workers right now are the new factory class of worker. Like you're sitting in an office, not moving, typing all day long, looking at a screen. I don't know. And then you see all these businesses closing down. I have to say, in my generation, Generation X, I know so many men that are not working. It's ridiculous. And they're middle-aged. They're middle-aged men, and they're not working, or they're working 2 or 3 jobs.
Yeah, and they're menial jobs. It's like up around here, Denver, Colorado is about 100 and something miles from here. I live way out in the mountains out here, but there's Colorado Springs that has Fort Carson, Peterson Field Air Force Base, Shriver Space Command, NORAD, all of it, Air Force Academy. It's a big military thing, so they have a stable economy with checks and stuff there. But up in Denver, there's jobs, but they're not really good jobs. You know, they're lower paying. And a lot of people that I know around here, everybody's broke. Most of the guys here are retired veterans and on Social Security and stuff. And the economy here is slow in the rural areas. And there's no good jobs. This whole thing, America has been sliding downhill after World War II. You know, my uncle was at the Battle of the Bulge. My stepdad was at Pearl Harbor. And after that time, we were at a peak in power of our empire. But it's just slowly been kind of sliding down, and then the shadow government and all this secret stuff has been going up. And so it's almost like a cancer that's feeding on the body and soul of our nation. And, you know, I'm glad, I hope Trump can make a difference, but he's only one man. This problem deals with the international drug trade, the international arms trade, and it's very deep, and the tentacles go all around the world, like the heroin. It's a record crop of opium over in Afghanistan right now.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're dealing with, on top of this horrific education system and lack of jobs, we've got not an opium problem, we've got a heroin problem, and then, of course, that's mixed up with that fentanyl stuff.
Yeah.
So people are just dying, which I think is part of the program that they have for us, like just kill yourself off. Why don't you?
Yeah, and then there's, you know, the worldwide arms business, and behind all of this, Rachael, is, you know, the international bankers. They're, you know, bankers. What we tell people is they don't care about a conflict, you know, like between France and England, or between Saudis and Iran or something. They don't care about the conflict. What they care about is the debt that the conflict produces. So they don't care about ideologies, you know, Republican, Democrat, socialism, communism, capitalism. They don't care about any of that. They loan money to both sides, and then they fight wars, okay? And then there's a winner to the war. They really don't care who wins, because then they get to loan
back the debt from that war.
Then they get to loan money back to both sides to rebuild after the war.
Right.
So the whole thing is a moneymaker for them. And they love war, and they love chaos, and they love to keep us in fear, because when we're in fear, we're disempowered and easily controllable. It cripples your mind, the fear does. And so you ask what we can do. I say first try to step over the fear and bring the light. And if enough people can do that, we'll start to make a change. But it's a big problem. There's a lot of things to it, and I simply don't know how it's going to turn out. All I know is I can do my little part like I'm doing now.
Right. And then you've written the book, Choosing the Light, Dark Secrets of the Oklahoma City Bombing. And that was kind of yours. Go ahead.
No, it's almost 700 pages. It's 360. It's got 360 double-sided pages. It's got a lot of, you know, data in it, and cooperation and pictures and all kinds of things. And if anyone needs it, I want to give out my email if anyone wants copies.
Okay, go right ahead. Give it out, please.
Yeah, it's my Indian name. I'm part Cherokee Indian, so it's my Indian name. It's Cody Golden Elk at yahoo.com. So it's Cody Golden Elk. And so if you want a copy, we have some CD copies, and we're setting up a website with a PDF thing that's coming up here pretty soon. But it took about 4 years for me to write that book, and I tell my story, but I corroborate it with, you know, like the vaccine, some of the records from the Gulf War Syndrome thing, some of the hearings of the Vietnam thing with the Agent Orange, all kinds of documentation about the Murrah Building and all the details about all that. So it's a pretty well-researched book. And
I was going to say, that sounds like a lot of research.
it is, yeah.
Did you do this all yourself, the research, or did you have other people helping you?
Well, I did most of it myself, but I relied on people like Joyce Riley. You know,
wow, she's awesome.
Oh, she's a wonderful person. I mean, she really cares about our veterans, you know, and she was on the forefront of exposing this Gulf War syndrome stuff. And there's other researchers, you know, that are in the community trying to get the truth out. There's all kinds of people like you, Rachel, in your show that are trying to step out of this lock that the mainstream media has on the information in this country. You know, you've got Google and Twitter, Facebook, they're all censoring things now, and they're talking about this fake news stuff, and it's just a big mess. I mean, I see them.
Oh, I know, because since I started this show in January, I've never had more computer problems. I mean, this is ridiculous what we're going through over here. It's disheartening with my computer. But I totally understand what you're saying about Google.
Yeah, it's like when I first started going public with this, I had this book done, and it's been sitting for a couple of years waiting for the right time. And we had an interview with Ole Damagard with lightonconspiracies.com over in Spain, and we had a bunch of Skype hookups in Europe. And about 2 hours before this big thing, we were going to do it on the Kennedy. It was the 54th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. That was November 22nd. And 2 hours before that, my computer got totally hacked. I mean, the screen flashed and all this computer code stuff came across it, and it flickered and jumped around, and it totally shut down my computer. I couldn't access Yahoo or Gmail or anything. And so they knew we were going to do that because we've been planning it for a week or so, and they just shut me down to where I couldn't talk at all. Mm-hmm. And so now
I'm just going to say, I've lived this. I totally feel you. The woman that I'm working with to do, doing up a series, we're trying to produce a Netflix series about my book, Security Through Absurdity. And the woman I'm working with, she and I have both had our computers scrubbed. And she had her phone. She's had 3 phones. She had Mac phones that just literally everything on it just got scrubbed really quick. And on my situation, most recent situation is my next book that's coming out. I'm almost done with it. Literally, I was going to have it done for this Christmas, and it disappeared from my computer. It just disappeared. Another file that was associated with all the research that I've been doing for it, it just disappeared. I took it into the computer store because I was like, okay, I want to have some forensics done on this. How did this happen? I paid money, good money, almost $1 per file that they extracted that I had erased from this computer. And they told me, they gave me an external hard drive with every single file I had ever erased on this computer. And they said, well, it looks like your book and your file of research never existed on this computer. I said, how did that happen? They said, well, you must have touched somewhere along the way something that's like a grenade. And when it came into your computer and it touched your book and your file because it knew that it had to do with something you're working on a book, it just exploded and disappeared. I was like, okay, thanks. That sounds very, very, very technical. And I was like, that's just crazy talk. But you know what? No, it's not.
No, it's not. Rachel, the same thing happened here. One of the girls we had working here at the Star Lodge, she is a CPA accountant, and she's got a bachelor's degree in computer science. And so when they hacked our computers, she took 3 different laptops, hooked them all up, and she's got a degree in computer science. She spent almost 9 hours trying to figure out what happened. And then she said, I've never seen anything like this. This must be some kind of government malware or something. And she started crying and said, I've never seen anything like this. And we threw all the computers away and just went and got new ones. But whatever they sent, if you're fiddling around with the shadow government and you're trying to expose secrets and stuff like that, they can send you some whammies, some stuff that most people don't even know what it is. And we're on our 3rd set of computers right now.
Yeah, this laptop I have is my 4th one, my 4th Mac, my Mac Air. I'm like, you know what? And the reason why I got Macs is because people are like, oh, you can't hack them. Not as well as you can the PCs. And it doesn't matter, I don't think.
No, not when you're dealing with intelligence circles, NSA, CIA, like the Edward Snowden stuff. I got a picture of him in his book, and I've got a story about Joe Naccio with Q West in here with the NSA and stuff. But no, when you're dealing with that high-level stuff, they have all the goodies, and us civilians, we can't really compete with that. There's
But it's almost like they're like little demons that are just playing with you. Because if they really wanted to just stop it, they just stop it. I'm nobody. I'm just a person. I'm just writing a book. I'm talking to people on the air. Why would they even take the time?
Well, they have old divisions like Air Force Intelligence. They have a cyber wing, and they sit around and they read news stories and stuff that come into the United States from overseas, and they their job is to downplay the articles or write counters to them. There's a vast network of. I never really realized it until I went outside the United States and I came back into it, how deep the information control is here. They said the Russians had the Iron Curtain. Well, America, believe me, I guarantee, we've got the electronic curtain.
Yeah.
And back, about the CIA operation, the Mockingbird, back in, when they were controlling the editorial stuff out of, they had like 400 different agents who were actually their fronts were being editors and journalists and so forth. The whole time they were working for the CIA. And so they have this massive underground shadow government network of ways to control and manipulate information, because if you can control the information at its source, okay, then you can control the population through the manipulation of that information. And I'll give you an example. What they did over there, with the ISIS thing in Syria, our guys were flying off aircraft carriers, and they had a weapons ordinance to deliver, and they would call in to get a free fire, and they would be denied, and then they'd have to fly back, and standard procedures to dump the ordinance out in the ocean before you land on the carrier, to prevent accidents. Right. And they were debriefed and told not to made to sign national security oaths and stuff, and the pilots where they can't talk. And then they would take the wing camera footage from Russian aircraft that actually were attacking ISIS, and then they would substitute that over to us on our news here and tell us that was our planes destroying them, when ISIS was really a creation of Obama and the State Department. That's what happened at the embassy in Benghazi, that whole thing. I know that whole story. I was told that story by guys, they were ex-Marines, and then they were contractors for the CIA later, and they were stationed there that night when all that happened. But, there's so much propaganda, so much disinformation, and people like us, you say you're just a nobody, and you're just that, well, so am I. But they don't, one little leak in a dam can make the whole thing come down eventually if you don't plug it when it first starts.
Yeah. One of the things I said when I started this show, I said, because I really didn't know how far and wide the show would go, we just started on Mixlr, this little thing called Mixlr. It's like a computer site. It's a website that does radio shows, I guess. And then American Freedom Radio picked us up. And then I still didn't really know how many people are listening to me, but in my head I said, you know what, even if this is just like a homeopathic dose of medicine, like the teeniest drop of medicine, and it gets inserted into this massive body of knowledge that's floating around the collective unconscious, maybe this little homeopathic dose of truth would help. And that's my whole thing with this show, Shadow Citizen. I hope it does hope. I hope it does. Let's talk. Well, go ahead.
No,
I wanted to talk about Star Lodge.
Lodge
that you just talked about. You mentioned that, and you had told me about that. But this is where you're hanging out now. It's called Star Lodge.
I just wanted to tell you, we've been doing these radio shows, and just today we had a guy that called in, and he was one of the first medical responders down at the Alfred P. Murrah Building, and nobody's ever heard of him. And we talked for almost an hour, and I said, is it okay if I take notes? And, some people want their names used, and some people don't, of course. But here was a guy that was providing little tidbits of truth, things that nobody knows, things that people are afraid to talk about. And there's a lot of them with 9/11. I mean, we could talk for hours about that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but the point to this is, people go, "Why are you doing this, Cody?" This thing was poison in my soul. I carried it around a long time. I wanted to try to get the truth out to my American people. I love my country, and I know there's a lot of really good people here in America. I know CIA agents. I know guys in the Inspector General's office at CIA. They've had dinner out here at my house. I know guys in all branches, Marines, Army, the firefighters, those poor firefighters that breathe all that asbestos, at 9/11, they're all suffering now, Rachel. A lot of them have lesions in their lungs, and our guys are sick from Gulf War. And these shadow government people are manipulating the good American people. And there's a lot of good police officers, and there's a lot of good FBI agents. And they're being subverted and turned inside out by the shadow government. It's like a cancer. And so my deal is just to stand up for it and help bring people out like this guy that called me today, because the truth is out there. But a lot of people are too afraid to speak it. Like in the first part of this book, I've got a quote by Martin Luther King. It says, "The day we see truth and do not speak is the day we begin to die."
It's
true. So I've got a whole lot more information about the Oklahoma City bombing and the cover-up and the 10th Circuit judicial. It's just absolutely corrupt. And all that's in the book. It's all covered in the thing. But you said you wanted to talk about something else. So
no, the place Star Lodge.
Yeah.
That's where you are writing this book, or that's where you're doing the rehab stuff with it?
Yeah, it's called the Star Lodge Healing Center, and it's we're way out here in the mountains in Colorado. We're like 4 feet up against to the National Forest. This is old Ute Indian land here, and I'm part Cherokee, so we do some Indian medicine. We do some angelic healings. We try to do the old laying on of hands healings and homeopathic remedies for veterans. A lot of them, we work with the Wings of Warrior guys that get the service dogs, for the veterans. And when they come back from like Afghanistan and Iraq, a lot of them are just all messed up, and they're given these new drugs the Pentagon are giving them, and they got all those weird anthrax shots. They breathe all that uranium. They're a toxic mess. And we try to use homeopathic and old way natural healing things to alleviate some of the symptoms and problems. The VA, they just go in there and say, give them some drugs and go next, and they don't really care. I've heard so many horror stories about the VA. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
But we just run a healing center here, and that's my way of doing, and we never charge money. We just do things.
You don't? Where is this at now? Again, tell me where, if people need to find this, if they need this.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're in the central part of Colorado. There is about 100 miles or so southwest of Denver. We're almost due west of Colorado Springs, Colorado, about 50 miles. And it's near a town called Lake George, Colorado, little bitty podunk town. And then there's a reservoir, 11-mile reservoir. That's one of the best trout fishing places in the state. But we look down on the lake, and we're here, and we use the natural earth medicine and earth remedies, to help different people. We work on trauma victims like rape victims, and we treat alcoholism and stuff with spiritual, drug addiction and stuff with spiritual things rather than the drugs and the physical things. And we provide an alternate therapy modality from the mainstream medical stuff. We're not doctors or anything, and we recommend that people go to doctors for things, but there are spiritual causes for a lot of this stuff. And if you get into that, the spirit affects the mind, and then the mind affects the body. And so if you can get all three of those things lined up together and functioning back normally before the trauma occurred, then these people are restored to a more active lives. There's less chance of suicide. A lot of these veterans come back and they get suicidal, or they get very violent through their PTSD, and they beat their wives or whatever, and then they don't know it. I mean, it's like that this thing comes over them and they react, and then later on go, "Oh my God, what did I do?"
Right.
And so what we try to do is provide alternate modalities. And I did a talk at the VFW Post 11411 for the veterans up there. And we just try to help the best way we can with the old ways instead of all the drugs.
Mm-hmm. Is there a website or anything? Or do they just pick up a phone or just go out there to Lake George, Colorado, and say, "I want the Star Lodge Healing Center"?
No, we network with a community of healers, Reiki and massage therapists and so forth in the area. We do aromatherapy. One of the guys that works here is a certified raindrop aromatherapy guy, where he uses all the essential oils and helps people through that way. And so
it works. It works, right?
It works for some people. That's why we say a lot of people don't know about the Indian medicine. They used to have old warriors, and they had to heal them and do things back then. And I've trained under some of these medicine people, and so we present these things. A lot of the veterans have never seen any of it, and some of them we do the stuff too, and they go, "This is great. I mean, I'm not going to go back to VA." And other people say, "No, it didn't work for me." So we just provide an alternate modality of spiritual things, because the VA really doesn't address that. They just address physical causes, and they give everyone a bunch of dope and then kick them out the door.
Right. Yep.
So we're getting a website put up now, but we have people come here from all over the country. Just in the next week, we got people coming from Florida, Indiana, Ohio, and we do high-level spiritual work, and so it helps some, and others don't. And there's plenty of other therapies out there they can go to.
Right. How many people work at this place, Cody?
Well, it depends. It's seasonal. In the winter, like it is now, it's really cut down. But in the summer, we can have anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15 different people that help work. And so it depends on the caseload. And like I said, everything's real steep. In the winter, everything just shuts down around here because the snow drifts get 3 feet deep, and we're at 9,000 feet in the mountains. So the weather really it gets 20 below zero some mornings. So.
Right. Wow. So from the day that Harold Leonard came to you and said, "Would you bomb the Murrah Building?" to now, you've really made quite the change, Cody Golden Elk.
Yes,
this is
ma'am.
pretty cool. This is amazing. So you've got this book, this magnum opus that you're working on. It's almost done, or people could get it from you if they email you.
Right.
Or at your Cody Golden Elk at yahoo.com.
Right.
Are you charging for that book?
Yeah, we charge for it. What we're doing, we sell the CDs for $20 a piece, and we pay the shipping on it. Except if it's international, we've had a number of people from overseas that want it. We have to add like $15 for international, but any day now we're having the website is being worked on right now, and we're putting the book up there on a PDF so that people can bypass the shipping, because if you send it to Australia or something, you can bypass all that.
Right.
Through the PDF. So we're getting that up.
Great. Good. Good.
We also give it to veterans for free if they're a lot of disabled veterans, they're living on pensions, and they get 30% disability checks from the VA, and then their Social Security, and they barely make it month to month.
Well, all right. Well, thank you, Cody Golden Elk Snodgres. Thank you so much. Thank you. This was a great interview. And everybody, thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.